The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So one of the primary criticisms that is a fair criticism of Republicans who are against Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is that they've now been lobbying against it for nearly a decade. And no serious proposals have been made in terms of what to replace it with. There are some Republicans with relatively little power and influence who have drafted infrastructure, an overarching structure for how they would replace Obamacare. But those have not ever been taken seriously enough to actually be attached to a more credible repeal proposal. Certainly, since Donald Trump has been president of the United States, there has been no serious replacement in place, or at least proposed. And this is part of why you didn't even have unanimous Republican support for repealing Obamacare earlier on in Donald Trump's presidency. That gets us to now, where it appears, number one, that the Trump administration and Republicans are again kind of reinvigorated in their opposition to Obamacare and in trying to get it repealed. And number two, it seems that they actually are trying to put together a plan this time. There are reports from inside the White House that discussions have started on a healthcare policy proposal to replace the Affordable Care Act with three different conservative think tanks. And the idea here is that the National Economic Council, the White House, as well as a couple of other sort of center-right health policy groups, which are all about for-profit insurance, that's kind of their general outlook, are now working together on coming up with a plan. And of course, the idea is, as this new movement to repeal Obamacare grows, which it will as we close in on the 2020 election, they will be able to say, we have a specific plan and here's how it would work. Now, I think that there is one kind of caveat here, Pat, which is there have been some frameworks that were being discussed in media during the last repeal effort that Republicans had. Each was worse than the previous in terms of the number of people that would ultimately lose insurance, either because they would no longer be affordable for them or they would be kicked off some kind of government-funded plan. So it's not that there have been no ideas about how they would replace it. It's that the few ideas they've thrown out were analyzed to be completely destructive and disastrous. Maybe they can come up with something that won't be as bad. But I think the fundamental issue here is that the system we have right now, Obamacare, it's a conservative for-profit idea. It came from the Heritage Foundation during the 1990s. If you move further to the right, you're either going to increase cost for some group of people or get some people to lose health coverage. Like you need to move left if you want to reduce costs and increase accessibility. Those are the only options left.
Well, luckily, I don't think that the Republican plan for health care has any chance at passing, right? Because Democrats now have control over the House. If the American Health Care Act that they crafted a year or two ago wasn't able to pass when Republicans had total control, certainly this won't either. I think it's just because people realize that health care is number one as an issue facing the country. It consistently polls at the top. And so if Democrats are coming into 2020 with actual plans, you know, not all are calling for Medicare for all, but many are. Others are calling for Medicare buy-in and, you know, just strengthening the Affordable Care Act, whatever it may be. Those are actual plans. I think the White House has to have a response. They have to be able to say that we have a plan too. And if you vote for more Republicans in 2020, if you reelect Trump, we can try to get this passed. That's all they're doing here.
One of the funny things about this is that this plan that's in the works, Heritage Foundation is again involved in it. And it's so insane to me that Obamacare is more or less what the right-wing Heritage Foundation proposed in the 90s. Now we have it, except with Donald Trump having successfully weakened some parameters of it. And now the Heritage Foundation is again involved in a consortium that is demonizing the Affordable Care Act, trying to get it repealed and to replace it with something else. And this is all about what we've been talking about for so long. There is this kind of groupish tribalism. And if it's called Obamacare, it doesn't really matter that it was actually very similar to what the Heritage Foundation wanted. Now the Heritage Foundation is involved in trying to replace the Affordable Care Act. And ultimately, none of this stuff is good for people who just need health care. And that's the worst part about it.
I was just going to say, I think the original Heritage plan and the Mitt Romney plan, the stuff that Republicans were pushing for in the 90s, I don't think that included an individual mandate. And that's where many of those sort of centrist Republicans who wanted to pass a healthcare legislation like that differed from the Affordable Care Act. That's why they said that they were not in support of Obamacare because of the mandate. Well, now Trump has struck down the mandate. That became effective with the new tax law. So shouldn't that mean that the Heritage Foundation and these other Republican think tanks should be totally happy with the system that we have right now with regards to healthcare?
You would think so. You would think so. But of course, they're not. And we'll see what next atrocious abortive policy plan they put together. I'm genuinely curious from a mere sort of like you looking at a car accident as you drive by it perspective. I'm curious what is the next thing that they're going to come up with, because we know what needs to happen to reduce costs. We know what needs to happen to increase access, and right-wing ideas simply aren't going to get us there. We're seeing more and more electric scooters available for rent in a number of different U.S. cities. I believe it's starting to be available in certain parts of Boston, although not in my neighborhood. I was just in Washington, D.C., and they have them there. And these are often dockless electric scooters where you use an app to rent them. They are left in designated spots. They're not docked like the city bikes or other bike programs, bike share programs that exist in many countries. And there's a lot of really great things about them. But there are also some concerns that health and safety experts are starting to have. One of them is the clogging of sidewalks, people leaving these to be picked up by the next renter in many cases, and they are starting to clog up sidewalks. This is causing pedestrian traffic issues. Number two, there are a whole bunch of just minor injuries that are taking place. People on the scooters are sometimes experiencing minor injuries. People who are pedestrians are experiencing minor injuries as well. So I don't know, I like, as a general thing, Pat, I like the idea of these scooters. I think it is a much more efficient way to get around slightly longer distances when walking may be inconvenient, or you don't want to be all sweaty if it's warm when you get to work or whatever. I think that obviously any technology like this, if a lot of people start adopting it, you will be able to identify inconveniences and problems. But overall, I've not seen evidence that suggests that this scooter movement should be abandoned. I like it.
No, we just have to refine it, I think. I think the scooters should be left on the roadways themselves, not on the sidewalk. Same thing goes for bicycles and skateboards. I don't think they belong on the sidewalks. I think it's very dangerous for pedestrians and other passersby, because if you have some old lady walking next to a young child and then some bike or scooter or skateboarder tries to come through, you could definitely have some problems there. People can go to the hospital. So let's get them on the roadways. That's number one. And I wonder if having the docking set up is actually better in cutting down congestion than not having the docking set up. Because if you could just leave it anywhere, then people are going to just leave it anywhere. And that could mean face down in the middle of the sidewalk. And then that becomes kind of an obstacle. I'd rather just have the dock set up in different places.
I'm not sure about the roadway thing, because in a lot of places, if there's a designated bike lane, I understand saying the scooter should be in the bike lane. But in the parts of Boston, for example, where bikes are supposed to ride in the middle of traffic, I think it's pretty dangerous. I mean, at least when you're on a bicycle, there's kind of more mass there that might be noticeable to a driver. In a lot of places, I don't know that it's a good idea to say that scooters, where bikes would be riding in the road, the scooters need to be in the road. And to be clear, these are not like the Vespa type things that go 40 miles an hour. These are the little scooters that you often just kind of put one foot on and then you put the other foot on sideways behind it, kind of making a T with your feet. I don't know about making them drive in the road when there's no bike lane. That actually is a complicated thing to figure out.
Well, I don't think they should be riding the scooters or bikes in the middle of the lane as if they were another car, maybe off to the side a little bit. And I understand there is definitely some risk involved there. But if you decide to rent a scooter, you decide to buy a bike, then you're kind of accepting some of that risk. You know it's going to maybe put your life in danger. Whereas if you're just walking down the street on the sidewalk, you're not accepting any added risk there necessarily. You're just trying to live your life. I don't think you should be subject to being run over by a bicycle or anything like that. Maybe there's some flaws to my thinking, but that's where I come across
that it's necessary. I think I disagree with the premise that just because you're deciding to have a scooter, you should be accepting additional risk. I mean, I think it would be great if you have a more convenient means of transportation, if it's especially not a powered scooter, just one where you push with one foot. It would be great to say you get the convenience and it's not polluting, you're using your own muscle power, and you're not accepting the additional risk of having to ride in the road. I think that's great. I think people just have to be careful on sidewalks.
I think in a perfect world, we have maybe 2 car lanes and then a bike lane and then a scooter lane, then the parking lane, and then the sidewalk for us walkers. But I don't think we can achieve that so easily.
No, particularly not in old cities like Boston, where you've got a lane for each car, coming and going, a two-way road, and then as soon as it snows, it becomes a one-lane road instantly. You're certainly not getting 2 car lanes and a bike lane and a scooter lane and a parking lane and a sidewalk there. But maybe more modern cities would be able to restructure it, at least partially in some way. I don't have a scooter now, but I am sort of interested in getting one, and I might start investigating that very, very soon. Okay, Colorado State Senate passed a bill by a single vote last week, which aims to seize guns temporarily from people who are deemed to be a threat to themselves or others. Okay, this doesn't mean they lose their ability to legally own a gun forever. It means that if you can demonstrate that they are in sort of an acute situation where they might harm themselves or others more easily with the firearm than without it, that the firearm can be seized. And Weld County Sheriff Steve Reams is so against this that he says he would go to jail before he enforces it. And maybe someday he will have that opportunity. I don't know. Republicans in the state Republicans in Colorado right now have too few votes to stand in the way of this. But there are 64 counties in Colorado that are opposed to this bill, and many of them are declaring themselves so-called Second Amendment sanctuaries, counties in protest. So even though, Pat, it seems that the legislature would be able to pass this, I'm saying today, I'd be shocked if this becomes the law.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting take on it. Why would you be shocked that it becomes the law? Just because many people will be protesting it?
I think that even if the state legislature passes it fully and there's an attempt to actually enshrine it in the law, that there will be such opposition from the people running the counties that they're not going to arrest every sheriff. They're not going to. I just think it's going to be practically impossible to force its enforcement. And I think it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about. I mean, maybe that's true because I think there are a lot of right-wing sheriffs out there, and Steve Reams is certainly one of them. I think with this piece, though, him just trying to get out ahead of it, it's showing that he wants to be seen as like a martyr figure, kind of like Kim Davis, that county clerk who refused to accept approved marriage certificates among gay couples. I think what he's trying to do here is totally just out of self-interest to make the news. And if he actually does not want to enforce the law as written, he has the option to resign or enforce the law. Those are his 2 options, or he can go to jail. I think, resigning would be totally fine with me.
So there's a couple different issues that are being brought up with the bill. One is that the burden of proof is low for the seizure of the firearm, that it's just a preponderance of the evidence. This is what is used in civil cases. So you might remember that O.J. Simpson, in the killing of Nicole Brown Simpson and her then partner, he was found not guilty criminally, meaning that there was not guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal court of law. But then in a civil case where it is a preponderance of the evidence, basically it means like 51% likelihood that this is what took place, he was actually found civilly liable. And some of the opponents of this law say, if you're going to seize someone's firearms, which they legally have, even though they haven't committed a crime, because you think they might be able to, that a preponderance of evidence is too low. The problem literally is, Pat, you're saying, do we think it's likely that they would commit a crime harming themselves or others? And that's not something you can prove. How do you prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is going to harm themselves or others? By its nature, it's sort of what's our best guess.
And in an instance like this, time is of the essence. You have to make sure that people are safe first and foremost, that people aren't going to pose an immediate threat to themselves or their, families, friends, whoever it may be that they're threatening. And if you go through the normal legal procedures, that could take weeks, that could take months. And it's, I think, important to first and foremost make sure that people are safe and then address gun rights after. But of course, gun rights fetishists are not going to approve of that solution.
That's the other issue that the pro-gun people are saying, which is that it allows the firearm to be seized before there's any court appearance. There's no court appearance and you're seizing the firearm immediately. And then the bill would require a hearing within 14 days with the gun owner present, and the gun owner can make the case for keeping the weapons. I get that that is potentially legally problematic if what you're trying to do, I mean, listen, let's assume that in good faith, what people are trying to do with this bill is prevent individuals from harming themselves or others with firearms. You can't wait 2 weeks to take the firearm away. I mean, it just doesn't work. I'm not saying it's going to be acceptable legally to say we're seizing the firearm immediately. Later, they have to come and prove that they're actually not a danger to themselves or others. I get the legal argument that's being made. Obviously, if what you're trying to do is identify people who present an acute risk to themselves or others, you need to be able to seize the firearm right away. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless because then they have potentially 2 weeks to do whatever it is you're worried that they're going to do. So I don't know how it's ultimately going to shake out. I understand the impetus for wanting to do it. I also understand, I'm not saying I agree with it or that I like it, but I understand the legal objections that are being brought up, and we'll see where this thing ultimately ends up. That does it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow, regular week this week. Next week, Monday, I'm here. Tuesday will be Ben Dixon. And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I will be coming to you from potentially very sunny Las Vegas, Nevada.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.